Welcome to BookWorthy, where we talk about the heart behind the books your kids are reading. Today, we're talking with author Dorina Lazo Gilmore-Young. She is the author of several devotionals and Bible study tools for women, but also a couple of children's books. Today, we're talking about Kailani's Gift, a picture book that showcases the value of patience, perseverance, and blessing others with your gifts, while focusing also on the celebration of family, Filipino heritage, and dance. Welcome to BookWorthy, Dorina.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
It's fun to have you. I've been following you for a while, and I love just your big heart and watching you and your family just glorify God in all that you do. But to start us off, let's start with our random question of the week. What is your favorite thing about spring?
Well, spring is one of my favorite seasons because we get to see the things that have been growing underground begin to bloom. And I live in Central California, so I get to see lots of flowers on the mountains and the hills and plants, lots of farmland that's around where I live. And it's just a miracle every time it happens.
It seems to surprise us that those pops of color after months of not so much. It really is always a surprise and a joy for certain. Well, tell us a little bit about your children's book, Kailani's Gift.
Yeah, this is so fun. This is a project actually that I worked on years ago. My first illustrated children's book that was published was called Cora Cook's Pancit. And this was about a little Filipino girl who was learning how to make a noodle dish. And it's a bit about Filipino family and history and culture. Well, I wrote Kailani's Gift actually as a sequel to that book. That was an invitation by my editor at the time. But some different things happened where the publishing company was sold to a different company and that editor ended up leaving. And so the Kailani's Gift that I had originally written no longer had a home. And through the years, I had sent it to some different editors, different publishers, but it really wasn't until I think it was 2020 where I had an editor from Waterbrook and Multnomah Kids reach out to me. And she, kind of similar to you, she had followed my family online. She loved seeing some of the multicultural things that we do and, ways that I incorporate that into our family life. And she said, "Oh, would you ever be interested in writing a children's book?" And I was like, well, that's funny because I've already published one and I have a sequel that I wrote and several other kind of ideas in the works. So long story short, loved being able to connect with that editor. And when she read this manuscript, she really loved it. And we started working on it as one of the projects that I would be publishing with that company. So I'm super grateful for Bumi Ishola, who is my editor for that. And it's so interesting because it's a book about perseverance. And it took more than 10 years for this book to come to fruition. So in many ways, kind of the backstory was also about having perseverance.
That's fun how God kind of makes it part of your own journey as you're working through trying to tell a story to children and families. Tell us a little bit about what Kailani is experiencing in this story.
Yeah, so this little girl is the youngest of many siblings, and she wants to learn this traditional Filipino dance called the Tininkling. And her siblings are really good at it and they're practicing. And so she kind of, is the little sister off in the corner who's like, I want to learn. But it turns out it's actually a pretty hard, complicated dance. And so that's why it requires courage and requires perseverance from her. Her dad actually comes along and helps her to learn the dance because he loved dancing Tininkling when he was younger. And I think also it's kind of this interplay of how do we follow something that we might be interested in? How do we develop our gifts, which maybe we're not good at when we first start? And then how do we bless others with that gift? And so part of the book, which I won't give away all the details, but just to say that Kailani gets to actually bless others with her dancing towards the end of the book. And we see even a little redemption between her and her brother, whereas before her brother was kind of the one teasing her that she wasn't good at dancing. And I love that portion of it because so often I think kids start to give up on something because they think they're not good at it when they start. And it does require perseverance. And it might be the thing that we are actually very talented and gifted at if we put the work in.
I love that message because I have a bunch of perfectionists in my own home. And so they rarely will step into something that has piqued their interest because they fear not succeeding in it. And I know that's part of my own story too. And it's amazing if we just take the time to know that even if I'm not the best at it, I could still enjoy the process, enjoy learning. I could still bless others with a talent that I am working and developing on, whether that's dancing or writing or football, whatever that might be for our kids. So I love that message. Now, what do you hope kiddos kind of walk away from Kailani's story with?
Well, I do think kind of with along with what we were talking about, that I want kids to understand that having perseverance and endurance is something that is a value in all of life, not just for performance, but even, when we're going through hard things, when we're learning something new, like this with the dance, even if we are, having to grow in a certain area, maybe it's in academics or in relationships, that having courage and endurance and perseverance is really important in that. And I think by telling it as a story, it's less kind of hitting kids over the head with like, this is the takeaway or this is the message, and more letting them observe, like, okay, well, what did Kailani do to persevere? What are some of those kind of negative scripts that she needed to overcome because she was teased for kind of being clumsy, which actually she's not clumsy. She's just not good at the dance when she starts, and she needs to learn some of the footwork to it. And so for me, storytelling is really this opportunity for us to help teach kids those values, which are values that are in the Bible, but sometimes they're kind of hard to get our arms around if we're just describing them. So a story is such a great way to do that.
I love how stories give us a chance to walk in someone else's shoes, to grow in empathy, to experience something that we feel, but in another way, and to actually put words to it or put, mindsets that, are very hard to grasp conceptually. And a story allows a child to walk through those things in a way that seems formulaic, but it's more just that we kind of walk through it just like we would, because we rarely will take steps along the way to process what we're going through as children. But to go through a story and walk through someone else's process allows us to see our own ditches and hardships, in new lights. And I love that.
For sure.
Now, you are kind of teamed up with several other authors in a cohort to kind of represent different cultures in literature. So can you tell me a little bit about that cohort that you're a part of?
Yeah, it's my privilege actually to kind of link arms with other children's book writers. I'm really passionate about telling multicultural stories, but also in promoting and championing my fellow authors who are doing something similar and sharing about their cultures. And I think it's so important, especially for us as believers, Christians, that we recognize that God created diversity. In fact, diversity is God's idea, is one of the things I always say, because if we look in scripture, we see that He is the one who made each of us unique. And if we can celebrate that again through stories, because stories are so powerful in teaching us, rather than standing up in front of a classroom of kids and saying, like, we need to appreciate cultures. How much more impactful is it if they read a story, they get to peruse illustrations that really highlight those things? So this little cohort of friends, we're all children's authors. In fact, we all share one of our publishers. We're published by many different publishers and editors, but one of our publishers, Waterbrook Multnomah Kids, which I mentioned before, and the same author we share. And we didn't even realize that until we kind of got into this collaboration. But my friends, Sochil Dixon, Dorina Williamson, yes, she has the same first name as me, but that's a different person. And my friend Tina Cho. And we all write books that celebrate God's diversity, that talk about real things that happen to kids, and also do teach those Christian values, but through storytelling. And we love to promote each other's work so that we get to multiply that audience.
I love what you guys are doing, not just in the area of diversity and culture, but also just in that authors, we can support one another. We're not in competition. We are celebrating each other's victories. And I love seeing that online, especially. And I wrote an article recently about kind of why we have the Bible in so many different languages and kind of why that's so important. And I love how, Waterbrook Multnomah especially is taking the time to have books that do present different cultures, different lifestyles, different ways of communicating sweet truths about God, because our God is, like you said, a God of diversity, a God of, just culture and people. And that comes in so many different shapes and sizes.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. And I think that collaboration is so important. I think there are a lot of authors who are more in competition with each other, like you mentioned. And I have discovered that when I step into that community mindset instead of the more scarcity mindset, it blesses me too. And, our readers get the blessing of that because we hope that readers are not going to just read Kailani's Gift. They're going to want more books. And so since these books, even though they're very different in their styles and their context, I think they have the same spirit. And so it just makes so much more sense that I would help fill people's bookshelves with the books that my friends have written as well.
And I love that because I love to fill my bookshelf with books.
Yeah.
Too fun. Well, Dorina, can you tell us what's your favorite book other than the Bible?
That I've read. Okay. That's such a hard one. I will mention a children's book that was very impactful in my young life, and partly because I was longing for diversity, but I didn't see it in a lot of places when I was younger. And I did find a children's picture book that I have one of my earliest memories of reading picture books. And it's called 9 Days Till Christmas. And it actually was an award winning book, I think from the 50s. I mean, pretty old. But the reason why that book caught my attention, it's about a little girl who is Mexican in background, which is actually not my cultural heritage. But it talks all about how her family celebrated Christmas and something called Las Posadas, which in Mexico is kind of this series of parties and parades that really follow the idea of Mary and Joseph, and their travels, and then how Mary has baby Jesus. And so what I saw in that book was this representation of culture, was this girl with brown skin and going to pick out this piñata at the market with her mom, and kind of the festivities that they were preparing to welcome people to this party. And there was something about it that just felt like home to me. It felt like my family, and it felt like it was celebrating something that, even though it wasn't about my culture, that I really wanted to learn more about. And so I remember that book just being so impactful. And it's one of the books I think that really kind of planted a seed and helped inspire the books that I have published as well. Because I want other kids to see themselves in the pages of my books. And even if it's from a different culture than their own culture, to be able to be curious. What can I learn about that culture? Or what can I learn about my own story? And sometimes kids are not even asking those questions about their own cultures and their own stories. And again, we get to celebrate God's diversity when we are curious and when we really go on that treasure hunt for some of our own personal history as well.
I love how, culture is so rich and so deep through across the world. And I love bringing culture into my own home. I know for our family, I know you guys went to Paris around the Olympics not too long ago. And we do a tradition in our home where every time that there's an Olympics or opening ceremony, we'll have a dinner from that country. So we'll gather a whole bunch of people and everybody will bring some sort of dish from whichever country. So we've done a Russian dish. We've done Taiwan food. We did Paris food, which of course we had to have some French fries, which aren't Paris food, but some
They do have
croissants.
good French fries there.
But it's fun to introduce culture into our families. I know even we have an Irish background. And so St. Patrick's Day always comes with an Irish meal. And even though it's not something that was done when I was growing up, it's something I want to instill in my kids, that their culture has value and it has meaning and a lot of history to unpack. And I love that. How have you incorporated culture into your own families?
Yeah, you're kind of bringing to mind something that we did actually that started during the COVID pandemic, when so many people were sheltering at home and social distancing. And I was trying to think of how could we connect our family with the world, even though we felt so disconnected from people. And we ended up starting this. It turned out to be kind of a little program or curriculum that people can still get if they want, but it's called Global Glory Chasers. And it really grew out of that idea, similar to what your family did, where it was like, okay, we would do it once a week where we would learn about a certain culture. And the way we would do that is we would gather some of the recipes of some of the traditional foods and we would try to make them together. And we created some videos as a family just making some of those dishes. And then we would oftentimes either read a book or we would watch a movie that would be a family activity. And then, even there was some other fun things like dances or games that you could play that really celebrated those different cultures. So that's something that we have done in the past. And then even like you mentioned, there's some holidays where like my family, we don't necessarily have Irish background, but we always celebrate St. Patrick's Day with Irish food. And my mom was a folk dance teacher, so she knew how to do some Irish dancing. So when my girls were little, she would always get out kind of, the Irish jig music, and we would do a little bit of dancing after dinner. And I think just even if you can't do it perfectly, being able to create a culture where your kids are learning together, where they're having fun together. Again, following kind of that curiosity, even for older kids, maybe it's not dancing or playing games, but maybe it's watching a film and then having more of a kind of critical discussion about that film together. Now that my girls are teenagers, that's a little bit more what we do. And I think that, there's a richness there that, when there's even difficult things going on in our world today, there's racism in our world. It opens the door for those conversations a little bit easier because we have that foundation of, okay, these are God's people and God's people come from a diversity of backgrounds. And even if it's not the same as ours, we can love them. And here's some ways that we can do that.
I love that. And I love how culture is so rich in the Bible itself. Even though the Bible, most of it takes place in one centralized location, you see constantly people of other countries coming to influence and affect and the Israelite population and even their effect on the world around them. I think I could just talk forever just about how fun it is just to think of all the people of the world celebrating Christ when he comes again and just knowing that everyone will be there of all races and all nations. And it's a beautiful picture. I can't wait to see.
Agreed. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited for that feast one day that we're going to have in heaven with all the different types of food.
And plenty of dancing, I'm sure. Now, Dorina, did you always want to be an author?
You know what? I am one of those kids who, ever since first grade, I wanted to be an author. And I had a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Kaczynski. I remember she had us write our very first creative story. And she encouraged me that one day I was going to be an author. I didn't know what that meant when I was 6 years old and I was writing about unicorns traveling the world. But you know what? She planted a seed in my heart, and it is truly what gave me the perseverance. I mean, now I'm 48. So this is a lot of years that I've been working on this goal of trying to publish books. And it takes perseverance. There's a lot of rejection that happens in publishing, but I'm still so grateful that I had that teacher and that I have pursued this career because I think storytelling is power. And like we mentioned, it's in the Bible. It's really actually what Jesus used to teach and encourage people.
Because he just knew what our heart was able to hear. We're not always able to hear, you have done something wrong, but we can hear, what is it? I think Nathan was telling David a story about a shepherd, taking, that was a way for, to point to David himself without pointing a finger and to really stir in his heart. And I love how the Bible does that and just what power stories do have. Now, what can we expect next from you, Dorina?
Well, I'm actually working on an interesting project right now. I have written a little bit about our family's grief journey. My first husband died of cancer. And so I'm writing a journal that is for teens who are going through grief. And even if you haven't lost a loved one through death, there's so much grief that is in our world. And I feel like it's something that is really important. It's a hard topic, again, to talk about. I believe that through scripture and through journaling and through stories that there really can be healing. So that's my next project and probably more details to come as far as publishing and dates and all of that.
That sounds exciting. It's one of those, grief is not always just about losing a family member. Sometimes it's about losing an idea that you had or losing a identity that you had clung to. And I love that you're stepping into a space that is both hard and needed, especially in that teenage space, to be able to process those hard feelings in a healthy and God-honoring way.
I think it's not a book that feels like, oh, this is so happy and so exciting, but I feel super passionate about it because I think it's needed.
I love that God is bringing you through your hard to bless others. And so I know that he's going to continue to do that with you for sure. Where can people find out more about you and your books, Dorina?
Well, probably the quickest and easiest way is to go straight to my website, and that's dorinagilmore.com. I am on Instagram almost every day, so that's a fun place that I like to hang out in real time. But if you go to my website, then you can see all my books and all the other fun resources.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Dorina.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to have this conversation.
I've enjoyed it for certain, and I look forward to more. Thank you so much for joining Dorina and me on this episode of the BookWorthy podcast. Check the show notes for any books or links that we discussed, and let us know in the comments what is your favorite thing about spring. If you follow BookWorthy on social media, you've heard about the middle grade March Madness contest and giveaway. Help choose the #1 middle grade book, and the more that you enter, the higher your chance to win the Reader's Prize on April 4th. Check out more about the contest and giveaway over on social media, and happy reading!